previous sections, we talked about the importance of your team and why it's important to have certain traits in your teammates. Today, we're going to talk about how to create your startup team. This is a very difficult process because it's more of an art than it is a science. So you'll need to find a way to apply what you learn here to your specific team. But please take this seriously because many entrepreneurs don't. They typically take anyone near them, whether they are coworkers or friends, and they invite them onto the team without really understanding their level of competence or their abilities. It's much harder to fire someone, especially your friend, than it is to hire. So be very careful in this selection process. In order to know how to build a startup team, you need to start by knowing what your team is going to be doing. Look at this list. It's a whole host of things that range from creative things like ideation all the way to business and technical things. And of course, none of these things can be done by one person alone. So you're going to have to build a great team. Now, this breaks down into two major components. The first component is experiences, network, and knowledge. This is like knowing how to code, knowing how to build a business model, being able to talk to customers, being able to do market research. These are much easier to assess. The second set are skills and strengths that we call soft skills. These are very difficult to assess. Leadership, strategy. It's very difficult to see if your teammates have these abilities, so you'll need to find a way to be able to assess them over the course of the next few weeks. The first question that we typically get from entrepreneurs is, where do we find our teammates? How do we find our team? Well, there are three main ways to find your team. The first is what we call team-centric. This is where you find teammates through your network, your friends, your family, your acquaintances. These are people that you pull into the team, and these are people you may have worked with in the past, so you know what their skills and their strengths are. The second way is what we call research-centric. This is where companies emerge out of the lab. Now, this happens a lot in universities where someone has come up with an invention or a discovery, and people start gravitating towards that discovery. Google is a primary example of this, where a research project spawned into a company. The third way that most people find their team is through events like hackathons and classes like this. This is what we call market opportunity-centric team formation. It's where people from all over campus or all over industry come together to meet, and it's easy because you don't need to convince them to do a startup. The folks who are in the room are already self-selected as people who are interested in startups. What you have to do is find a way to assess their abilities and their skills to see if they're complementary to yours. While you're in a class like this, I encourage you to use the other two ways of finding teammates as well. I'd go to labs to see if there are people working on projects similar to the one you're trying to work on, and I would go look at your network of contacts and colleagues to see if some of them may be interested in joining your team. Let's take a look at who we should add to our team. Look at this picture of Apple founders Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Now take a look at this picture of Microsoft founders Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Do you see anything similar between these two teams? Of course, they both started their companies when they were young, but if you take a closer look, look at how different the founders are from each other. Steve Jobs looks very young. Steve Wozniak looks older. Same thing with Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Even though they're all around the same age, not only do they look different, however, they add very different value. In the case of Apple, Steve Jobs was the business and design genius, while Steve Wozniak provided the technical background. If you look at Microsoft, Bill Gates was the business mind, while Paul Allen provided the technical experience. So what we have here are very diverse founding teams. And this is a trend that we've seen in virtually every tech startup. Multiple people playing different roles, but they are complementing each other. This is what we call diversity as an act of survival, and every startup deals with this. So if your team is made up of all mechanical engineers, you will struggle greatly. But if your team has a business student, a design student, all host of different types of skills, you'll do far better than those that are just from the same discipline. Now, there are 5 different ways to look at diversity in your startup. The first is pretty basic. It's called business function, and it describes what each person on the team needs to do. That is business planning, engineering, design, project management, and sales and marketing. Now, your team might not be big enough, so you may have to double up on some of these functions. Another way to look at diversity is based on the roles that people will play. That would be coming up with great ideas, being the idea guy. It's being the communicator, the person who speaks well externally, can talk on stage. The third is the peacemaker, the person who brings everyone back together after the team has had some conflict or fight. The fourth is the problem finder. Now, that person is the person who can find really big, important problems to solve. The next role is the solution finder, the person who can find the thing that solves those problems. Oftentimes, the problem finder and the problem solver are the same person. The next role is the executor, the person who makes sure everything gets done. This is what we call the resident ninja, the person who can just get it done. If your team doesn't have this person, go find this person, because he or she will be incredibly important to your success. The next role is the balloon popper. This person, while not the most positive role, has to find all the things that can go wrong. So if you have a great new idea, a great new feature you want to put in your product, this is the person who can tell you all the reasons why it won't work or why people won't use it. You need this person because you don't want to invest a lot of time and money in things that won't work. You need this person to find those problems before you make that investment. Now, the last role is the puppy shooter. And let me take a moment to describe this because it is as bad as it sounds. When you're starting a company and you're building a product, the entire team tends to fall in love with certain features and functions. They think if they can make it animated, or we can make it mobile, or if we can do this other really great thing, it will make the product even better. That is called a puppy. That's the thing that everyone has fallen in love with. The puppy shooter, however, knows that if they spend way too much time working on the puppy, they'll never release on time. And so the puppy shooter takes it upon him or herself to shoot the puppy so that the team can focus on the things that matter most. Now, it's not the best role to take, and it's not the most pleasant one, but your team needs to have this person. Sometimes your mentor plays this role. Sometimes it's an external person who plays this role, but make sure that you don't make bad investments of time and money on things that will slow you down. Another way to look at diversity is through what we call team dynamic. And the car is the best metaphor for this, because some people play an accelerator role. This is the person who pushes the team to move faster and further. Then there are people who play the brake. They slow the team down because they want to make sure we do things right, that we do things the proper way. And then the third role is what we call the clutch. And that is the person who knows when to move fast and when to slow down. Now, if your team has too many accelerators, you're going to hit a wall at 100 miles an hour. If your team has too many brakes, you'll never leave the room. So you need to have a diverse group that balances out these 3 energies. Another way to look at your diversity is through what we call the Silicon Valley triptych. You need to have a hustler, a hacker, and a hipster. Someone to sell it, someone to build it, and someone to design it. Now, like with all of these things, you may not have enough teammates to do all of them, so you'll have to double up in some cases. The final way of looking at diversity that I have found to be useful is by using Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, where he talks about the maven, the person who's the expert on a topic, the connector, the person who knows everyone in that industry, and sales, the person who can sell it. Make sure your team has all 3 of these things. However, with all that said, team formation begins with you. You need to know what value you can bring to the team in order to attract the best people to join yours. So you need to do an assessment on your strengths, your weaknesses, your personality quirks, why you're doing a startup in the first place, and your risk profile. And while it might be uncomfortable, You have to get good at talking about what you're good at, what you can contribute, what value you can bring to the team. So find a way to be able to sell your strengths. Now, as you go out to find team members, keep in mind the 5 different ways of looking at diversity. Try to find balance. Try to find the diversity that will make your team really, really successful. If you load up with all engineers, you'll run into problems when you need to do business activities. If you're all business students, you'll never be able to build anything. So make sure that you find the diversity that will allow you to compete. Now, the question always comes up, how do I assess the skills of my teammates? Well, you have to go beyond what they say, and you have to run them in a test. And so we've given you several exercises to test out your teammates. Now, if you've only teamed up with your friends, this has been a missed opportunity. So moving forward, take the opportunity to meet as many other people in your course, people that you've never worked with before or have never met. Test them out. See if they have skills that you could use. See if they might be complementary to your team. And also test out whether you can have healthy conflicts. That is a key component of success. Can you guys argue over a really good point, but at the end come to some kind of agreement and work together? Diversity is the key to success.